The enforcer knocked 3 times. It was 6:47 in the morning, and Naomi Johnson was already awake. She was standing at the kitchen counter in her scrubs pouring Nora's cereal when the knock landed on her door. 3 sharp, deliberate raps that did not sound like a neighbour and did not sound like a delivery and sounded exactly like what it was. She opened the door. 2 men in dark jackets stood in the hallway of Eclipse Tower with a document in one hand and an attitude in the other. The one in front held out the paper without making eye contact. "Ms. Johnson, vacate notice. You have until 9 a.m. Naomi took the paper, read it once, read it again. "I have a child in the next room," she said. 9 a.m., Ms. Johnson? "I have contacted your office 6 times in the last 3 weeks. 6 times. I have the emails. I have the call logs. Every single interaction is documented and time-stamped." The man in front finally looked at her. "Management's decision is final." And here is what Naomi Johnson did not do. She did not cry. She did not beg. She did not grab the doorframe or raise her voice or dissolve into the kind of desperation that these 2 men had probably seen before and had learned to wait out. She looked at them both for one long moment. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." She closed the door, and then she walked to Nora's room and stood in the doorway and watched her 7-year-old daughter sleeping with her favourite stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Naomi stood there for 30 seconds. Then she went to the kitchen counter, picked up her phone, and called the news desk at SBS Seoul. The next morning, Kang Ji Hoon was in a meeting with 3 senior directors when his assistant knocked and entered with an expression that had never appeared on her face in 10 years of working for him. "Sir, you need to see the news." He turned on the screen. And there she was. Naomi Johnson standing on the pavement outside Eclipse Tower in the rain. 2 suitcases, nursing scrubs, spine straight, not crying, not begging. Just standing there with the posture of a woman who has made a decision and is seeing it all the way through to the end, no matter what the end looks like. And beside her, Nora, 7 years old, yellow raincoat slightly too big, stuffed rabbit under one arm, looking around at the street and the cameras and the rain with the open, curious eyes of a child. Then Nora looked directly at her mother and said, "Is this like camping? Are we going camping, Mommy?" The room went completely silent. Ji Hoon watched Naomi's face crack. 1 second, 1 fracture across all that composure. There and gone so fast that if you blinked, you missed it. He did not blink. The reporter confirmed 2 years of perfect tenancy. Documented contact attempts ignored by management. An automated eviction triggered at 60 days of partial payment with no human review and no grace period and no phone call from a single living person. Then the reporter asked, "Ms. Johnson, why did you call us?" Naomi looked into the camera. Not at the reporter. Not at the crew. Through the lens. At whoever was watching from the other side. Because the man who owns this building has never once looked at the people living inside it, she said. I want him to look. I want him to look at me and at my daughter and explain to my face why 2 years of faithfulness counts for nothing the moment life gets hard. I want him here in person. And I want him to bring an answer. The broadcast cut. The meeting room was silent. Ji Hoon's senior director cleared his throat. "We can have legal—" "Get out," Ji Hoon said. Everyone got out. He sat alone with the screen and the silence and something that had not visited him in a very long time. He knew what it was. He recognized it from a pavement in his childhood, from a boy watching his mother carry boxes with her spine straight because she refused to break in front of him. He picked up his phone. "Pull every eviction record from the Seoul portfolio," he said. 12 months, everything, on my desk in 1 hour. He did not sleep that night. The report was 43 pages, and it sat in front of him like a confession. Not someone else's confession. His. 847 families. He read that number 3 times. 847 families removed from his properties in 12 months. 63% of them single-parent households. He turned to page 7. Average tenure of evicted tenants. Most had lived in his buildings for over a year. Many for 2, 3, 4 years. People who had chosen his buildings, who had stayed, who had built their lives inside his walls and been processed and removed with less consideration than he gave to replacing the furniture in his conference rooms. He turned to page 12. Maintenance logs. Heating failures ignored for months across multiple buildings. Broken locks deferred until they became something worse than broken locks. Structural repairs reported and forgotten so many times they had graduated into a different category of problem entirely. He closed the report. He had been running an empire built entirely on appearances. Polished lobbies, clean facades, and inside the walls where his tenants actually lived, neglect wearing the clothes of efficiency. If you are watching this right now, and you have ever felt like a number to someone who had power over your life, stay with this story. Because what happens next changes everything. Ji Hoon summoned Pinnacle's sole director to his office at 8 the next morning. The man arrived in a good suit, looking completely unbothered, which told Ji Hoon everything he needed to know about how much accountability had ever been required of him. The director walked through the eviction model with the pride of someone presenting a success story. He finished. He looked at Ji Hoon, waiting for approval. 847 families, Ji Hoon said. Correct. Well, within industry. How many had children? Silence. The system doesn't segment by. How many were evicted during winter months? More silence. Were you aware, Ji Hoon said very quietly, that the heating system in Tower 7 failed for 11 weeks last January, while 63 families were living inside it? The director's confident expression found its edge for the first time. Maintenance is managed through a separate... You're done, Ji Hoon said. Leave the building, today. Mr. Kang, please. I won't repeat myself. The director left. Ji Hoon sat alone and thought about the little girl in a yellow raincoat asking if homelessness was camping. Then he put on his jacket and went to find Naomi Johnson himself. What no one watching the broadcast that night had seen was what happened to Naomi's life in the 72 hours after those 2 men knocked on her door. The eviction filing hit her credit score within 24 hours, 14 points gone overnight, not because she hadn't paid, because the filing existed. The system did not wait for a court date to start punishing her. Her hospital's HR department flagged the address change the next morning. A note appeared on her employment file, housing instability, and the word instability, sitting next to a foreign national's name on an employment record in Seoul, was not a neutral word, and Naomi knew it. Nora's school called about enrollment continuity. Her school district was tied to Eclipse Tower's address. A shelter in Mapo-gu fell in a different district. Nora would need to be temporarily transferred. A 7-year-old who had finally settled into friendships and a classroom routine was now looking at a new school with a stranger's desk, and nobody who knew her name yet. The childcare arrangement Naomi had spent 8 months carefully building, dependent on proximity to the tower, to her hospital, to the specific geography of the life she had constructed, collapsed within 48 hours. One missed rent payment had not just cost them an apartment. It had begun pulling every thread of the life Naomi had built in Seoul simultaneously. The job, the school, the childcare, the credit, the visa that was tied to the employment that was now flagged because of the housing that was gone, because of 2 months of partial payment that had come from a hospital, cutting overtime hours that Naomi had not chosen to lose. And through all of it, Naomi did not let Nora see her sweat, not once. She explained the shelter like an adventure. She explained the new school like an opportunity. She sat on the edge of a folding cot at 11 p.m. after Nora was asleep, and she made lists, legal options, housing contacts, documentation she would need, names of journalists she had already called. And she worked, quietly, in the dark, while her daughter slept, because that is what Naomi Johnson did. She worked. The emergency shelter in Mapogu was 20 minutes from Eclipse Tower and felt like a completely different world. Grey corridors, fluorescent light that had no warmth in it anywhere, the smell of institutional cooking and too many people in too little space. Families moved through the hallways carefully, taking up as little room as possible, as if they were apologizing for needing to exist somewhere they had not chosen to be. Ji Hoon walked in, wearing a coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and felt every step he took. He found Naomi in the common room. She saw him at the same moment. She was on her feet before he crossed half the room, reading him, deciding, and by the time he reached her, she had already placed herself between him and the table where Nora was eating. "I know who you are," she said. "Then you know why I'm here. You think you're here to manage this." Her voice was completely even. "Offer something small. Make it quiet. Go back to your building feeling like you handled it." She tilted her head slightly. "That is not what is happening." "Then tell me what is." "I contacted your management company 6 times in 3 weeks. Every single interaction documented and time-stamped. Not one person responded. Not one human being picked up a phone to say, 'We hear you. Give us 30 days. We are working on it.' Nothing. Just 2 men at my door at 6:47 in the morning while my daughter was eating her breakfast." Her voice did not waver, but her eyes were carrying something her voice refused to. Something that told him exactly what these weeks had cost her in ways no report could put a number on. "I had to explain to a 7-year-old why we were leaving with suitcases," she said. "Do you know what I told her? I told her we were going on an adventure." The silence between them had weight. "I am not the story you should be worried about," Naomi said. "I am just the one who made the call. There are 847 others. Ji Hoon stared at her. "You know that number. I have been doing my research since the night I got that notice. Mr. Kang, I know the eviction rate across your entire Seoul portfolio. I know the average tenure of the families your company removed last year. I know about the heating failure in Tower 7 last January. I know about the broken locks in Tower 12 that were reported 9 times before anyone responded." She held his gaze without blinking. "Did you know any of that before yesterday?" He said nothing. That silence was its own answer, and they both understood it completely. Ji Hoon left the shelter that day without making a single promise, because he understood, instinctively, immediately, that this was not a woman who would accept promises from a man she had no reason yet to trust. He went back to his office and froze every active eviction proceeding across his Seoul residential portfolio. All of them. Immediately. He ordered full physical inspections of all 17 buildings. He pulled Naomi's complete tenant file and read every email she had sent to Pinnacle, all 6 of them polite and documented and utterly ignored. And he sat with that for a long time. He went back the next morning. Nora saw him first. She ran across the common room toward him and stopped directly in front of him and looked up. "You came back," she said. "I did." Ji Hoon looked at Naomi over her daughter's head. Something passed between them. They sat at a corner table. Nora settled nearby with her crayons, glancing up at Ji Hoon periodically. Ji Hoon told Naomi everything. The inspections confirming every deficiency she had described. Pinnacle terminated. The in-house team being assembled. Human review on every eviction file before any proceedings could begin. Mandatory grace periods. Financial counselling partnerships. Legal aid access so that tenants understood their rights before anyone knocked on their door. Naomi listened without expression, running the logic, checking every wall for the place where it sounded good, and fell apart underneath. "What happens," she said, "when your finance team tells you the numbers don't support it? The numbers already support it. Tenant retention costs less than constant turnover. Legal fees from contested evictions cost more than grace periods. I should have known that years ago." "You should have asked years ago." "Yes," he said. "I should have." The directness of it stopped her. She had been prepared for defence, for the careful positioning of powerful men who want credit for admitting fault without fully sitting inside it. This was not that. She studied him carefully. "Why do you keep coming yourself? You could send lawyers, a cheque, a press release and a settlement." Ji Hoon was quiet for a moment, contemplating. And then he told her. About the loss of his father. About his mother who worked 3 jobs. About the morning they were evicted from their home and the property manager who had looked at them like an inconvenience rather than human beings. "I built everything I have on the promise that I would never be powerless again, and I would be a better person than that manager," he said. Naomi was quiet for a long time. "There is something else you need to know," she said finally. "The families in your buildings who were evicted, most of them had legal grounds to contest. Procedural violations by Pinnacle that any lawyer would have caught in 20 minutes. Missing notifications. Bad process, avoidable in almost every case. They didn't have lawyers. Nobody in that situation has lawyers, Mr. Kang. That is precisely the point." She leaned forward slightly. "There are right to counsel, pilot programs running in other cities. When tenants have legal representation, the eviction rate drops by over 80%. Not because tenants win every case, because having a lawyer means the landlord has to follow the actual process. Due process alone, just that, saves families." Ji Hoon looked at her. "Send me everything you have on it." She studied him. "You will actually read it? Send it tonight. 2 months. That is how long it took Kang Ji Hoon to dismantle everything Pinnacle had built, and replace it with something that had a human being at the centre of every decision. The in-house team assembled. Cases reviewed individually. Families received phone calls from actual people who used their names and listened when they answered. Maintenance failures repaired. Grace period protocols written into every lease across all 17 buildings. A right to counsel partnership established with 3 Seoul law firms. Every tenant in the Kang portfolio now had access to legal representation before any eviction proceeding could begin. Eviction rates across the portfolio dropped 78%, and through all of it, Naomi. She had not been offered a formal role, not yet, but she had appointed herself an informal one the moment she realized Ji Hoon's new team was well-resourced and genuinely lost when it came to talking to the people they were supposed to be serving. She attended their first community meeting and spent 40 minutes afterward explaining to 3 well-dressed team members why their language felt like a corporate apology rather than an actual conversation. Ji Hoon arrived at the end of that session and stood in the doorway. Watching her, his director leaned in quietly. "She's better at this than anyone we hired." After the room cleared, Ji Hoon waited. Naomi packed up, walked to the exit, found him still there. "Your team is getting better," she said. "They had a good teacher." She looked at him sideways. I'm not your employee, Mr. Kang." "I know." He paused. "I would like to change that. Resident Advocacy Director. Full portfolio. Direct authority over every tenant facing decision before it reaches legal. You report only to my office. Nothing gets filtered. Nothing gets buried. I want the problems reaching me before they become evictions. Naomi looked at him steadily. You have watched me run one community meeting. I have been watching you for 2 months, he said. I have read every informal report you have submitted to my team. I know what you are capable of. So do you. If I find something your organization does not want found, you bring it to me directly. And if it is something you do not want found, you still bring it to me directly. She searched his face for the calculation underneath the offer, the angle, the thing powerful men always had underneath the thing they said. She did not find one. I will read the contract, she said. That is all I am promising. She walked out. The Open Door initiative launched with Naomi, as its public face and Seoul's housing community took notice. The press took notice. Ji Hoon's competitors took notice. Ji Hoon was watching something else entirely. It was never the big moments that got to him. It was the small ones. The way she argued with him in a meeting in front of his senior staff. Not aggressively, not recklessly, but with the complete ease of a woman who had decided a long time ago that the size of the room she was in had nothing to do with whether her voice belonged in it. One evening after a long day, Ji Hoon came out of back-to-back meetings to find Naomi at the end of the hallway outside his office, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed and her head tilted back the way people do when they are running on less than they should be. He stopped. "When did you last eat?" he said. She opened one eye. "That is not a professional question. It's a human question. I had something at—" She paused. "This morning." He went to his office, called downstairs, and 20 minutes later they were sitting at the small table in his office, with food between them and the city outside doing what Seoul always did at night, glittering and indifferent and beautiful. She ate quietly. He watched her, without making it obvious he was watching her. "You don't have to do this," she said without looking up. "I know. I'm not one of your tenants, Ji Hoon. You don't need to take care of me." It was the first time she had used his name without the formal address. Neither of them acknowledged it, but the air in the room changed, and they both felt it change. "I'm aware," he said. "Eat." She looked up at him then, really looked, the way she rarely let herself look. And something passed between them that had been building for months, and neither of them reached for it, and neither of them looked away. She looked down at her food first. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "Your mother. What was she like when she wasn't surviving?" The question undid something in him. Nobody had ever asked him that. Everyone who knew his mother's story asked about the hardship, the 3 jobs, the eviction. Nobody had ever asked about the woman underneath the survival. "She laughed loudly," he said after a moment, "embarrassingly loud. She loved terrible television dramas, and she would argue about them like they were real. She made the same soup every Sunday because it was the one thing she knew she had time to make well." He paused. "She smelled like the same soap her whole life. I still can't smell it without—" He stopped. The room was very quiet. "She sounds wonderful," Naomi said softly. She was. He looked at her. She would have had strong opinions about you. Good or bad. She would have said you were the most stubborn woman she had ever met. A pause. She would have meant it as the highest possible compliment. Naomi looked at him for a long moment, and then she laughed. Real, warm, unguarded. The kind of laugh that had nothing professional in it, that belonged entirely to the person she was when nobody was requiring anything from her. Ji Hoon watched her laugh, and felt something close inside him that had been open and unprotected, without his realizing it. He was in love with her. He had known it for a while. He had simply been avoiding the word. "What about you?" he said before he could stop himself. What does Naomi Johnson look like when she isn't fighting something? She considered that. I don't know, she said honestly. I've been fighting something for a while. Nora's father. A silence. She looked at the table. He was there, and then he wasn't, before Nora could say his name. And I told myself that was information. That people leave. That I was better at building things alone. That needing someone was just another way of giving them a place to hurt you from. She looked up. I'm very good at building things alone. I know, Ji Hoon said quietly. So am I. They sat with that, the two of them and everything it meant, sitting in the space between them like something waiting to be named. His phone rang. The mask came back instantly, the way it always did when the other world called, complete and immediate, a shutter closing over everything that had just been in his face. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He stopped at the door. Naomi. She looked at him. He wanted to say something. She could see him wanting to. But the phone was still going, and the moment had broken, and whatever it was stayed behind his eyes. He walked out. Naomi sat alone in the room with the city outside, and the food between them and the word stubborn hanging in the air like something warm. She pressed her hand flat against the table. She was in love with him. She had known it for a while. She had simply been refusing the word. She stayed in that room for a long time, not doing anything about it. She was still going to protect herself. She was still going to protect Nora. But the part of her that had been sealed shut since Nora's father left was no longer as sealed as it used to be, and she did not entirely know what to do with that. Now, here is where everything nearly fell apart. Director Yu came to Ji Hoon's private office on a Tuesday morning. He sat. He explained slowly. The portfolio reforms were disrupting revenue streams that ran considerably deeper than property management. The turnover cycles, the vacancy gaps. And then Yu said Naomi's name. The temperature in the room dropped so completely and so fast that Yu went physically still. Ji Hoon did not raise his voice, did not move, did not change his expression by a single degree. He looked at Director Yu with the quality of stillness that had made far more dangerous men than Yu decide immediately that they needed to be somewhere else. Say her name again, Ji Hoon said, and you will regret walking into my office today. Yu did not say her name again. 2 phone calls, brief, specific, absolute. The people above Yu were reminded, without volume, without theatre, but with the cold, complete authority that Naomi Johnson was not a pressure point, not a variable, not a message that anyone in any organisation was going to send through her body or her livelihood or her daughter's stability. She was untouchable. That was the end of the conversation. The threat was gone by morning. Naomi never knew it had existed. Ji Hoon never told her. The Open Door initiative launched on a Tuesday morning in front of Seoul's housing community, and press and legal partners and 3 city council members who had been watching what the Kang portfolio had done with quiet, calculating attention. And Naomi stood at the front of that room, and she was not presenting a corporate initiative. She was telling the truth. She talked about 847 families. She named the systemic failures one by one. Automated eviction systems designed without human discretion, underfunded legal aid that left working families defenceless, a housing market that had learned to treat people as liabilities and vacancy as opportunity. She talked about what eviction actually did, not just the apartment, but the credit score, and the school district, and the childcare, and the employment file, and the visa status, and all the threads that one notice under a door could pull simultaneously. She talked about her daughter, asking if they were going camping. The room was completely silent. And then she talked about what right to counsel had done in the pilot programs, what grace periods had done to the numbers, what happened when you put a human being at the center of every decision instead of an automated trigger. She put the data and the faces together in the same sentences so that nobody in the room could separate the policy question from the human one. She called for citywide right to counsel legislation. She called for mandatory grace periods across all residential properties in Seoul. She called for eviction data to be publicly reported so that tenants could see what landlords were doing with their buildings before they signed a lease. This was no longer Ji Hoon's reform. Naomi had turned it into Seoul's conversation. Ji Hoon stood at the back of the room and watched her do it. Watched her take everything he had built and make it bigger than him. Watched Seoul fall in love with her the same way he was slowly doing. The community celebration at Eclipse Tower that evening was everything the months of work had been building toward. The room full and warm and loud with the sound of people who felt safe in their homes. Families who had been at the edge of losing everything now laughing in a building that had promised to keep them. Children running between chairs. Neighbours who had lived on the same floor for 2 years and never spoken now exchanging phone numbers and food recommendations and weekend plans. Nora was completely in her element. She had Ji Hoon by the hand at one point, looking up and talking to him. At one point, Nora said something. Some entirely deadpan 7-year-old observation about the evening. And both Naomi and Ji Hoon turned toward each other laughing at the exact same moment. Heads tilted close, completely unguarded. The professional distance between them gone like it had never existed at all. Someone in the crowd had a phone. By the following morning it was on every Seoul tabloid. Their faces, their proximity. The way he was looking at her in the moment of laughing. The way she was looking back. Naomi's phone started ringing before 7 a.m. and did not stop. Her credibility was being pulled apart by lunchtime. Was her access to Ji Hoon always personal? Could her advocacy work be trusted if she was involved with the man she reported to? The families she had fought for were receiving calls from journalists asking for comment. Her hospital colleagues were talking. Everything she had built, her independence, her voice, the trust of 847 families, now sitting in a shadow she had not created and could not control. She walked into Ji Hoon's office. She placed her resignation letter on his desk. She stepped back, spine straight, eyes steady, the same woman from the pavement in the rain, the same woman from the shelter, still standing, still refusing to be made smaller than she was. She said nothing, and she left. Ji Hoon didn't stop her. He looked at the letter. Then he picked up his phone and called the SBS Seoul news desk. The same broadcaster who had stood in the rain outside his building with a camera pointed at a woman with 2 suitcases and a little girl asking if they were going camping. Within 30 minutes, Kang Ji Hoon was standing in front of cameras. All of Seoul watched because Kang Ji Hoon did not do this. He did not stand in public and speak about personal things. He did not give the press access to anything that lived underneath the business. Ever. In 10 years, not once. He looked directly into the lens. Then he said, "I'm not going to insult Naomi Johnson by denying what anyone with eyes can already see," he said. "She is the most extraordinary woman I have ever met, not because of what she built, though what she built is remarkable, because of who she is when building it, though it costs her everything, but she built it anyway." He paused. "Her integrity has never been in question. Mine has. And I want to say something to her right now that I should have said in private before I let the world make it complicated." Another pause. Real, unscripted. The pause of a man choosing his next words like they are the most important ones he has ever said. "I am not her employer. I stopped being her employer a long time ago in any way that matters. I am the man who is asking her, publicly, so she can never say she didn't know. Not to walk away. The anchor said nothing for 5 full seconds. Back at home, Naomi stood watching the screen, still holding herself together, her eyes full, not of weakness, not of uncertainty, but of something she had been carrying for months with nowhere to put it down. Nora appeared at her side. She had been sitting in the corner this entire time with her stuffed rabbit, watching everything, waiting with the patience of a child who had already decided how this was going to go. She looked up at her mother. "So are we staying, Mommy?" Naomi looked at her daughter. She looked at the screen. And Naomi Johnson, fierce, unbreakable, always prepared Naomi Johnson, stood in the middle of everything she had built, and everything she had been afraid of, and every wall she had constructed around herself since the day someone left without looking back, and for the first time in this entire story, she did not have a single answer ready. If this story had you from the first knock on that door, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so part 2 finds you the moment it drops, and tell me in the comments. What do you think Naomi does next? Because that man just stood in front of all of Seoul and said her name, like it was the only true thing he had ever said out loud. And she has a decision to make. Part 2 is coming. Do not go anywhere.